Okay, so in this video we're checking out the Geelang LIGO78x. This is one of two different versions. The other one has, I think it's a gray colored plastic prop guard here with different motors, I think 1202 motors, and this has 1204 motors. I don't have that version. I think that one is a little lighter and sort of meant for the Insta360 Go camera, and this one is meant for the naked cameras like the naked GoPro or the SMO 4K, which you see on here, which is the footage you're going to see later. But first, let's go over real quick what else you get in the box besides the drone. And you get this battery. It's a 454S, I believe, and get a spare set of props. So these are the 51mm ducted props from Jumpvan. That's these four-bladed props here, as you can see. You get this right-angled micro USB connector, and I'll show you where that's going to be used. You also get a case for a naked GoPro. I think this is for a Hero 6, and I'm not going to be using this, so I will probably give this away on my Instagram. So if you're following me on Instagram, be on the lookout. If you're looking for a naked GoPro case for free, I'll probably just give this one away. I think this does come with the model. Not 100% sure on this, and I'll explain here what's going on with that. But you basically have a naked GoPro case here. It looks kind of like the Beta FPV one. Got some instructions there. This was the end of the wire that was on the drone that was already pre-installed. That only works with this BEC, which is, the BEC board's already inside here. You can see it's 2 to 6S for this one, 5 volts, 2 amps for this BEC. So it's different from the Beta FPV one, and this plug only works with this one here. I think it goes like that. And I actually cut this off because I was going to use the connector for the SMO 4K and not this camera at all. So that's why I'm going to be giving this one away. So be on the lookout for that later on my Instagram. Now this does come with a couple of these mounts. See one here is kind of in the center, and then this one is supposed to go in the front. And you do get some longer screws for mounting this here. So you can mount this either way. I think probably better to mount it in the middle because you're going to run the battery underneath like this, and that'll keep things more balanced. If you run a heavier battery here in the front or heavier camera here in the front, it's going to make the front quite heavy and stress the front motors a little bit more. Yeah, so I would recommend using the one that comes with here in the goes for the middle. Also, the one in the front doesn't have vibration dampening, so you're going to get jello. So you can see this mounts directly to the frame like this. So you can get more jello with that from vibrations from the motors, whereas the one in the center here, you can see it sits on the 4 screws on the sort of the diamond shape, and they're basically bent like this, so it absorbs some vibration, so it'll absorb some shock, keeps the camera from absorbing all the vibrations, so you get less jello in your video. Now this mount here is made for a naked GoPro, which is a little bit thinner than the SMO 4K camera, but I just got it in there, just kind of shoved it in, and I used the battery strap that was included to hold it in place. It does work fairly well, and as you can see here, this connector here I cut off. This is actually pre-soldered to the flight controller, and then I cut that off and I soldered on the connector that works with the SMO 4K camera, so that's one there instead of the other one. That's for the naked GoPro case. And then, as I mentioned before, this is a 78 millimeters motor to motor. So in order to get the 2-inch prop set up here in a 78 millimeter setup, you have to go with 16 by 16 parts. So these are 16 millimeter by 16 millimeter mounted 4-on ESD and flight controller, and then the video transmitter here is in the back. And just to compare, here's the 85X here. It's a little bit bigger. I mean, 85 millimeters versus 78 millimeters, not a whole lot of difference, especially when you consider all the material here for the bumpers. That does increase the overall size of it, but it does keep the profile very small by bringing the motors even closer together. It does kind of lead to a little bit of instability because it, especially if your camera's pretty heavy here on top, it's harder for the motors to maintain balance because the motor to motor distance is narrower. But obviously they're targeting this for indoors and tighter spaces, that kind of thing. you may take that into account. Also, the fact that because the motors are so close together, if you are flying it indoors, if you're flying it close to the ground, where you're going to get a lot of like sort of ground effect, prop wash, that may affect the way this flies. Did come with a pid tune from the factory, seemed okay. Doesn't come out in the video if you use flow state stabilization or any kind of stabilization. It should be fine. That should all go away, but you can see it in the FPV. It does sort of bounce around a little bit. It could be the wind, ground effects, etc. It is a very small motor to motor distance, so it does affect how it flies. Now, the specs for this model on Banggood are, I think, totally wrong. I think they released those specs and then they changed this, and this is, again, an early model, so like they said, this has 1205 motors, and this actually has 1204 5000 kV motors, and this is actually set up for 4S and not 3S. The flight controller I think it was a 401 EC that's on the Banggood site is like a 5 amp and only 1 to 2S, which is obviously not true because I was flying this around on 4S. So I'm not 100% sure what kind of the 401 EC is in there. I'm thinking it's probably more like a 13 to 15 amp 16 millimeter 401 ESC, and it's BLLES, and they do have some sort of RPM filter set up in here, so they probably have Jazz Maverick firmware on the E401 ESC, and then and this is like not 5 amps or 2S. This is more like 13 to 15 amps and 4S for the 401 ESC is my guess, though I don't have confirmation on that at the time this video is out. And then the flight controller obviously can go to 4S, and it's an F411 flight controller, looks like. Nothing special. It's got 2 UARTs. It's 16 millimeters and 16 millimeters. There's a lot of the 16 millimeter flight controllers in that, with the F411s are kind of the same, and there's nothing special there. And then the video transmitter on mine is supposed to be smart audio enabled or tramp, but it doesn't seem to switch channels or change power. It's stuck on 25 milliwatts. So something is wrong with my setup. I didn't really dig into it really deeply as to what's wrong with it. Again, I'm kind of chalking it up to this is an early release, and they kind of rushed us out of the factory to get this reviewed. So I'm thinking they made a couple of mistakes here somewhere. Hopefully they'll clean that up when they get to production. Now the camera in here, they're saying it's GL950 something or other, 800 TV line CMOS camera, 4.3 camera. It looks like a general analog camera like any other I've seen out there. It might be something similar to like the Amp Lite, something like that. It does come with this little mount here that encloses the camera and gives you the angle. And that angle that came from the factory does match up with the angle for the Naked camera mount here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Mine came with the Crossfire receiver, came like these antennas like this, and I just kind of fished it through the mount here to hold it in place. It does come with other versions, I think XN Plus, FlySky, etc. So it does come with different receiver versions as well as plug and play versions. So let's see how much this weighs. This is with the SMO camera, 123.8 grams, and then with the battery that flew it with. Okay, so with the battery together, it's coming in 177.3. Let's take the camera off. Here's the weight of the drone with the camera mount, no camera, and now it's coming in at 90, 80, yeah, about 91 grams, and then with the 4S 450 battery, it's coming in at 144.5 grams. Okay, so something to be aware of is that it does include this right-angled USB adapter. You can see the flight controller is there, and the micro USB port's there. And this one is kind of the opposite of a lot of the ones you have, so you have to make sure you don't lose this because it is meant to go in underneath like this from the bottom, and it's a bit tricky getting this in here. And you do want to be very careful with these right angle adapters because you don't want to force anything and break off that USB port, because then the flight controller is pretty much ruined and you have to get a new one. But it goes in like this from underneath, like so, and you do really want to be careful you don't put too much pressure on that USB port. Yeah, just wiggle it in back and forth, kind of slowly, take your time, don't rush it, and you should be fine. But yep, this is needed to get your basically get this connected to Betaflight, otherwise you can't set it up at all. So that's the kind of a downside. You want to make sure you don't lose this, otherwise you're kind of in a bad pickle. Now, here's a couple things that did come in the box I forgot to mention. It does come with a wiring diagram for the flight controller, as you can see here. Pretty typical 16mm mounted flight controller. It does have the connections for the GoPro 6.7 BEC board here, as you can see, and I showed that to you earlier. This is the video transmitter, and then you can see where all the lines go for the various receivers that you could wire up. And then just have this other documentation here for the other model, and then this is the model that you're seeing in this video. Not a whole lot there, just sort of explains how you can, the different mountings work, etc., for the different camera mounts, and how to put the mount on for the center mount, that kind of thing. Now, I want to show you one more thing here. So the frame is interesting. So it has like these plates here for the front and the back. These are I think all of these plates are 1.5mm. So you have these plates for the front and the back to give it a little bit more rigidity. Then you have the main plate here for the 4 motors that have these little pointy ends that stick out to hold the duct on here, as well as over here and on these sides. And then you have another plate here that goes on top of that plate, this main plate here that holds all the electronics, I believe. I think all the main electronics are held on here. And then there's going to be a plate over here on top. And then they use all these little like self-tapping screws all over the place to go into this material. And I don't know what this material is. I think it's a PLA-like material, but it's like a lighter version of it to keep this thing, because it doesn't feel that heavy, based on the amount of 3D printed material there is here. But you want to be careful you don't over tighten the screws, otherwise they're going to strip out. And they do get loose from the vibrations, so you want to check them probably every few flights to make sure that they're not running loose, otherwise they're going to pop out and you'll lose them somewhere. They do have some spares in the package if you happen to lose some of them, but yeah, it's better just to check them, make sure that they're all tight so you don't lose them somewhere out in the field somewhere while you're flying around, because then you're going to have a hard time sourcing extra ones of these if you lose a whole bunch of them. Okay, so I think it's going to do it for this video. I'm going to show you the flight footage. Let me know what you guys think of this model. Put links down in the description for this one, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.